So the completed notes are posted in the Google Classroom along with any diagram, and that includes those power notes that we did together. And then I said to put them as part of your notes. All of that is posted in Google Classroom. So if you were absent for a day or so and you missed some notes, then you'll be able to find that information in Google Classroom. And we'll kind of just hit some highlights in a minute here after we fill this out. All right, so yesterday we talked about cellular respiration, and we said it kind of has three parts. Glycolysis that happens out in the cytoplasm, kind of before it, and then Krebs cycle and the electron transfer. And we said all together we end up with 36 ATP. But that was broken down into a certain amount of ATP from each part. So does anybody remember how much glycolysis gives us? 2, perfect. 2 ATP, and Krebs cycle gives us 2 also. And that means 32, the largest portion, the electron transport chain, that gives us 32 ATP. So as we always do, we will have a journal test. As at the end of the 6 weeks, I have quite a few students in here that don't do the journal. If you get a 0 on a major test, it's pretty hard to pass a class. Oh, Krebs gives us 2. Glycolysis 2, Krebs cycle, and then the ETC, the electron transport chain, gives us 32. All right. So let's do, first of all, the cellular respiration, what y'all have right there. And you will see this on the test on Thursday. It'll be one of the ones that you'll have a word bank, and you'll have to identify some things off of it. I don't know if I can turn them all the way off, because then I don't know that people can see to write. But I definitely can turn one off. And then let me go. Some of this makes that much difference. There, but not enough. So what organelle would that be if we're talking about cellular respiration? Where does that happen in? We talked about photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Where does cellular respiration take place in? Yeah, the mitochondria. So this is all representing the mitochondria. Or whatever you would like for your abbreviation to be for the mitochondria. So the first thing that we said that occurs is the glycolysis. And that is anaerobic, which means it does not require oxygen. And that's happening in the cytoplasm. So before it actually gets into the mitochondria. And the glucose that was made in photosynthesis is used here. Glucose, I'm just going to put shorthand. And that's broken down into pyruvate, which is just another chemical. So from glycolysis, glucose would be the chemical. This breaks down into pyruvate, and that gives me 2 ATP. Then the pyruvate is actually what moves into the mitochondria. And we have the formation acetyl, ACETYL, CoA. That's a CO and then a big A. And that's happening here in the matrix of the mitochondria. So pyruvate is broken down into acetyl, CoA, in the matrix of the mitochondria. And then it moves along into our next step after glycolysis, which is called the Krebs cycle. And this is aerobic, which means it does require oxygen. And this also continues in the matrix. So here where this little, I know you can't really add it in, but this is a place for you to put Krebs cycle. You want to just put your arrow. And then we said from that we get 2 ATP. And then it moves along after the Krebs cycle. It moves through what we call the electron transport chain. And we did it just with the initials. Tomorrow, like I said, you'll have a word bank. And this is aerobic, which means it does require oxygen. So that's what's happening here, the electron transport chain. And that's happening in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So glycolysis happens on the cytoplasm before it gets in, and then the other processes, Krebs and the electron transport chain, both of those happen in the mitochondria. One in the matrix and one in the inner membrane. And then this is where we get most of our ATP. So this is where we get our 32 ATP. So if we do a total for all of CR, that comes to 36 ATP that we've talked about a couple of times. So like I said, this is on the little, on the test for sure, not until Thursday. You'll need to know these different ATPs. You're going to need to know the process that's going on and the chemicals. So like glycolysis is going to break down to pyruvate. So this is one that you will definitely want to spend some time on for the test, because I feel like there's quite a few, probably maybe 10 or more questions just off of that. All right, let's just work down here through our questions. Cellular respiration occurs in the cells, specifically in the mitochondria. We talked about that before. You sure can. You need to know both of the equations that you quizzed on last week. There'll be some multiple choice that will ask questions off of that. And then there also will be a bonus where you can write them again and get bonus points off of that. So the cellular respiration for glucose is going to start with my, not for glucose, for cellular respiration is going to start with my glucose. So C6H12O6 plus oxygen go in, and that oxygen came from water that was taken in before photosynthesis. And then we have some enzymes, and it's actually 6 molecules of oxygen. And then from that, we end up with some waste products, 6 molecules of CO2, which the plants will use again for their photosynthesis. 6 molecules of H2O, which also can be used in that photosynthesis. The 36 ATP, which was the whole point of the cellular respiration. And then we said another waste product we did in our equation was that it gives off some heat. It's kind of just like wasted energy on that. I can move it up. I'll have to rewrite it, but that is no problem at all. I'll just look. Let me come back up here and then I'll rewrite it. All right. Let's go and we'll rewrite it again. So we start with our glucose, C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen. That is a 6, not a G. Enzymes. And then we have 6 CO2 plus 6 water plus 36 ATP, and then some heat that is just kind of given off and wasted. All right, number 3, during glycolysis, glucose is broken down into what? Yep, that pyruvate. I'll write it out, but it's right here where you wrote glucose, and you should have written pyruvate. And I can spell it out, PYRUVATE. And like I said, if you get it home and you start studying tonight or tomorrow night, this diagram could wait for you to study tomorrow night. It's not going to be on the part tomorrow. I won't be on it till Thursday. And you can't read your handwriting or you've missed up something, there is a filled-in copy in our Google Classroom now. So tonight you're going to want to study your notes. Glycolysis occurs, that's before the mitochondria, so that's cytoplasm, outside the mitochondria. We already did number 5 because we already went in and put where all the ATPs were. What goes into the Krebs cycle in order for that reaction to begin is that it needs that acetyl-CoA. And the Krebs cycle occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. And then we had already done number 8 because that was just filling in one of the ATP. And the electron train, transport train, still mitochondria, but now the inner membrane. Of mitochondria. Or mito, whatever you would like to use for an abbreviation. So when you're studying that diagram on Wednesday night for Thursday, study those questions below too. There are also some of those on that part where you're looking at that diagram.
Like, so that little black swirly thingy in the matrix mitochondria?
What swirly thingy?
The black circle.
The black circle right here in the middle?
Yeah.
That's supposed to be Krebs cycle. It's just over that's Krebs cycle. So these, if you look at these, it says acetyl-CoA, Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport train. Yeah, all of this inside of here. Yeah, all this inside of here is a matrix. All that little, yeah, that looks like it's, yeah, that looks like, because this is like a mitochondria is like being cut down sideways so you can see the inside of it.
So do this part.
Yeah, all that, exactly, all that's your matrix. All right, does anybody need me to read any questions on or answers on this? All right. Okay, it's just, I just want to show y'all. All right, are we good on that? No, yes, no, okay. So if you look into your Google Classroom, and when you get home, you'll do it right now. I'm just going to kind of show y'all some things. This is filled in. So like I said, if you get it home, I'm going to show you. So we did this one, and it wasn't for a grade. We did it together, and then I told you to add it to your notes.
Okay, because I have that and I was so confused.
Okay, yeah, so, and I knew you did. So if you never got a chance to fill it out, because you would have had to go and watch the video, it's now filled out in there.
Okay, because I looked at this and I was like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot in this. There's not as much off of this graph, off of this diagram as that one we just did. You do need to know this photosynthesis, and then you need to know these little water molecules, that they get split in the thylakoid. So if you want to highlight this off your power notes, I don't know if I can highlight it or not. Let's see.
Do you have another copy of that paper that you're...
Yes, I sure do. I'm sure I do. Just we'll have to go look for it for a second. No, it's not gonna let me pull it up. All right, let me see if it'll let me highlight, maybe. So, kind of this portion over here is kind of the most important out of this one. It doesn't go into asking a bunch of questions about this NAD, pH, and H+. That gets kind of confusing. But you do need to know that the water molecules are split in the thylakoid, which we also talked about that in the notes. That's part of the chloroplast. And that's the light-dependent reaction. And then on the light-independent reaction, that's where the CO2 is fixed. So not as much off of there, but there are a couple of things. Let's see if I can find them. I don't remember what day it is. Not, I can go ahead and do a copy. Oh, here we go. There you go. No, I'm going to hit the highlights on these notes, and that's it.
Oh.
You sure can.
I didn't finish the last page because I had no idea what to do.
Okay.
I'll go back and look at it.
All right, let's see what else we got in here. So we did look to that one. And then if you go down, we've gone through these notes, but I went ahead and put in a completely filled set in case you were absent. So know what chemo autotrophs are, which are right here if you're in your notes, if you have a highlighter. Chemo autotrophs, instead of they use sunlight, which would be photo, chemo, they use chemicals. Things are slow today. All right. Whoops. I have been working on it for a while, yeah. So the test has a lot, so you're really going to have to study the majority of your notes. But right here, Chemo Autotrophs, we kind of just went over that a little bit, that they use chemicals instead of the sunlight, and that they exist deep down in the ocean where they can't get the sun. This diagram of an ATP that I had told you to memorize, that is on the test. You'll have to identify where the phosphate part is, where the base is, and where the ribose sugar is. We talked about this. This is photosynthesis. I know there's more on here than we talked about, and that's because I kind of picked and choose what we had. Some of this we don't need to go into, but remember, chlorophyll is the green pigment. That's what makes green chloroplast. And it absorbs the energy. And the reason it is green is because it reflects green light. The reason my shirt is yellow is because it reflects yellow.
It's the green pigment in
It absorbs the energy. But the reason it's green is because it reflects green light. If something is a certain color, it's because it reflects that light and we see it. If it absorbs that light, then we would not see it. So like my shirt is absorbing like things on the spectrum that are in the blues. And that's why we don't see that. Oh, let's make it the door. Okay, we went over all this. I shortened some of it, and some of it that I shortened from the original thing. You don't see it on the test, so we're good. Like we didn't talk about all the leaves and all that. This right here, don't worry about this with the epidermis and all that, but you do need to go over this picture of the chloroplast. That will be one of the little diagrams you have a few questions on. By far, this diagram is the one that you have the most questions that come from one particular diagram. Oh, and this one too. There's a lot of questions on this one. Not until Thursday, so if you want to put off studying this until Thursday, need to know what the light dependent, light independent, where they occur, and the fact that water is split. That's where the oxygen, source of oxygen is from. Carbon dioxide is fixed. That's where the carbon comes from in the glucose. Kind of those things that I have highlighted are kind of the big takeaways on that particular one. Oh, that's just those two. Is everybody finished with this page? Okay, that's the two equations we did. I think we're good on those. And then this is what we went over yesterday. And then we just reinforced it. A lot of it was on that picture. Remember, something is anaerobic, then that means it does not require oxygen. So glycolysis is anaerobic, but Krebs and the electron transport chain, those are aerobic. They require oxygen. And then we talked about if we don't have enough oxygen, then after glycolysis, the organism will begin some type of fermentation just to make a small amount of ATP, not nearly the 36. And we talked about lactic acid fermentation. That's what we do, human muscles and some types of bacteria. And then alcoholic fermentation, that's what most bacteria do, and also yeast. So like for making bread or making alcohol. Seemed like there was a few questions from that. And then this, I don't think this is filled in on y'all's notes, or is it?
No.
So I would fill this in. Y'all probably do not need to write those equations down again, although I'll leave them up, but we've written them down several times. But this is a really good little summary in your notes. Talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Remember, an autotroph is something that can make its own food. So plants, some bacteria. A heterotroph is something that's dependent on another organism, like us. And then the cell organelle, what gas is taken in, photosynthesis, and what gas is released. And that's why we get so along so well with plants. If everything in the earth died and we were at least left with a few plants and a few heterotrophs, maybe we could get it going again, because one would be producing CO2 and then one would be producing oxygen. And then photosynthesis does not produce ATP, it produces glucose, which is food, a carbohydrate. And then that's broken down to produce ATP. And then cellular respiration, same thing. It doesn't actually produce food. It uses the food to produce some ATP. And this is usually of our one of our units that we cover as far as for the EOC. The EOC is usually pretty heavy in cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Has quite a few questions from that, although we can also hope that that's going to get canceled. All righty, that's all I got as far as the notes. Anybody have any questions on that? You want this?
So this side is just things that eat like regular food like us.
Yes, that would be our heterotrophs.
Okay.
So we can't photosynthesize, but we can go through cellular respiration. Plants actually photosynthesize and go through cellular respiration. And then the main source of energy for all of that is what? Sunlight, exactly. That gets it all started. Couldn't get started without sunlight and that green chlorophyll to absorb that sunlight.
Right.
That's why does your mom ever tell you to go outside and get some sunlight? Don't stay in the house. Plenty days, go out and get some sunlight. All right, so we will test for the next couple of days. Woo-hoo.